Three little girls keep following a millionaire to ask for help. What happened next will shock you. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. This is a story about a reclusive millionaire, a forgotten field, and three little girls who appeared out of nowhere, each carrying a riddle that would change his life. Now, sit back and get ready. This one will stay with you. The sun hovered low over the Nebraska horizon, staining the sky with hues of lavender and rust. Wind rustled the tall stalks of wheat on Emerson Blake's 1,000-acre farm, and the only sound was the hum of cicadas and the distant creak of an old weather vane atop the barn. Emerson stood on the porch of his farmhouse, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and a well-worn paperback in the other. He rarely read anymore, not since Clara passed 5 years earlier, but old habits refused to die completely. Sometimes on nights like this, he opened her favorite books just to remember what her laugh used to sound like when she read aloud under the kitchen lamp. He had once written stories too, children's stories. A best-selling series, actually, The Maker and the Lost Ones, filled with enchanted forests, talking animals, and hidden kingdoms. But after the accident, Emerson had closed his notebooks, locked his study, and turned away from everything he once loved. The world had gone silent, and so had he. It was only when he bent down to pick up the evening newspaper from the edge of his gravel driveway that he noticed it. A scrap of paper folded neatly and tucked beneath a smooth stone. It was not there that morning. Emerson squinted at it, expecting some local kid's joke or perhaps an old receipt blown in by the wind. But it was none of those things. Unfolding the paper revealed a child's careful handwriting. If you wake the maker, the ending might change. We are not lost, just waiting. At the gate. No name, no explanation. Just those 4 lines. Emerson glanced down his long dirt road toward the rusted gate that marked the western boundary of his property. The metal hinges moaned with every windstorm, and it had not been opened in weeks. Who would leave such a thing, and why refer to him as the maker? It was a term only his readers used, and even then rarely. Only the truly devoted fan base had referred to him by the title his characters had bestowed upon the fictional guide of their storybook world. He shook his head. A coincidence. Kids from town playing games. That night, the lights in his house stayed on longer than usual. The next day passed uneventfully. Emerson rode the perimeter of his property on his ATV, checking the irrigation channels and inspecting the south fence where a fox had chewed through the wire last week. As the sun began to sink again, he returned home dusty and tired. He tossed his gloves onto the bench by the door and was about to step inside when he saw it. Another paper. Same place. Same smooth stone. This one read, 3 names forgotten. 3 voices gone. We waited in shadows. Too long. He stared at it for a long time, feeling something stir in his chest. The kind of quiet, haunting emotion that had not visited him in years. There was something deliberate about the rhyme. Something that felt less like mischief and more like memory. That night, sleep did not come easily. By the 3rd evening, he found himself walking to the gate just before sunset. The air was dry, filled with the scent of hay and distant wildfire smoke. The fields glowed gold around him, and the silence felt unusually heavy. There was no one at the gate, just the usual old wood post, rusted hinges, and cracked chain lock. But beneath the gate's latch sat the 3rd note. We see the stars from the silo's crown. We whisper the stories when no one's around. The silo. His silo. The one on the North Ridge. It had not been used in years, not since the fire that destroyed half the grain stockpile. Clara used to call it the crown of the farm. The view from the top had once inspired entire chapters of his books. Emerson looked up toward the ridge eyes narrowing. The wind shifted. Were those footprints in the dust along the outer road, or just wishful thinking? He went to bed without answers. On the 4th evening, he parked his truck half a mile from the gate and walked the boundary line. The wheat fields swayed around him like waves tall enough to conceal children easily. He crouched low, waiting, watching. That was when he saw movement, just a flicker. 3 small shapes, not deer, not shadows, children. He stayed still as stone barely breathing. They huddled near the gate, placing something beneath the stone again. Then one of them looked up. The tallest of the 3, a girl with a hood pulled tight over her head. Her eyes met his from across the field. Wide, cautious, intelligent. She did not run. Neither did the other 2. They simply watched him. Emerson rose slowly, dusting off his jeans. "Hey there," he called out, keeping his voice soft, non-threatening. "You 3 all right?" None of them answered. The youngest one stepped closer to the older girl, clutching something fuzzy in her hands, a stuffed animal maybe. "I'm Emerson Blake," he added. "This is my land. You've been leaving these notes, haven't you?" The girl in the hood nodded once. "Why?" The 3 girls exchanged glances, then the middle one, smaller than the first, older than the third, reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She placed it beneath the same stone as if keeping tradition. Then the 3 turned and began to walk not away from him, but toward the tall grass beyond the western tree line. "Wait," Emerson called, stepping forward. "I don't know who you are," but they were gone, vanished into the wheat like ghosts. Emerson reached the gate and picked up the paper. "We're not ghosts. We are the story." But someone closed the book too soon. His hand tightened around the note. Back at the house, Emerson placed the 4 notes in a row across his writing desk. The desk had been unused for years, covered in dust and unopened letters from publishers. But now something inside him was cracking open. The notes were not random. They were invitations, clues. He made coffee at midnight and pulled out the old maps from his storybook world, the ones Clara had illustrated. There, on the farthest edge of the hand-drawn kingdoms, was a place called the Watcher's Gate. In the story, the gate had only opened when the 3 silent sisters recited the final riddle. He hadn't thought of that line in years. By morning, he was sitting on the porch with his coat and boots already on, waiting. When the sun rose, he saw a movement by the north edge of the property again. 3 girls, watching. He walked toward them, slow and steady. They did not run. When he reached speaking distance, the oldest girl stepped forward. She held something in her hand this time, a small handmade notebook bound in string. She handed it to him without a word. Inside were pages filled with drawings, his drawings, or copies of them, characters from his books, locations from his maps, all recreated by a child's hand. Precise, loving, intentional. On the last page, written in block letters, we found the ending place. "Will you write the rest?" Emerson looked up. The girls stood silently, expectantly. In that moment, he felt something shift in the earth beneath his boots. Not an earthquake, not a storm, a beginning. He glanced down at the notebook, then back at the 3 girls. "I don't know how to begin again," he said. The middle girl pointed to a blank space on the notebook's final page. Then she made a gesture, a circle drawn with her finger in the air. Emerson blinked. He remembered that gesture. Clara used it when telling bedtime stories to children during school visits. It meant, once upon a time, the girls were waiting. And somewhere in the wheat fields of Nebraska, an old story was starting again. By the time the sun had fully risen, the frost along the eastern pasture had melted, and the girls were already seated on the porch steps of Emerson's farmhouse. They had not knocked. They had not spoken. They simply appeared just as they had before, silent and waiting like something out of his own imagination. The oldest girl, the one with the gray hood, sat upright and alert, her arms slightly crossed over her chest. The middle one had her drawing notebook open, legs folded beneath her as she sketched with a small green crayon. The youngest girl clutched her threadbare fox toy to her chest and leaned against the porch post as if she had always lived there. Emerson did not know what to do with them. He had barely spoken to children since Clara died. Before, it had been a part of his life: school visits, bookstore readings, children's hospitals. He was the man who made up adventures and wrote them in ink. Now he felt like a stranger to everything but soil fences and the rust-colored barn beyond the wheat fields. But these girls, quiet, determined, mysterious, had pulled him back toward the parts of himself he thought had turned to dust. He brought out warm oatmeal in 3 bowls and set them on the wide porch table. They watched him with measured expressions. "I figured oatmeal was a safe bet," he said awkwardly. "I don't have much else. I live alone." None of the girls moved. He sat across from them, trying not to appear impatient. "Do you eat?" he asked after a few beats of silence. The middle girl, the one with the crayon, looked up and tilted her head. Then she gently pushed her notebook toward him. The drawing showed 3 bowls and 3 small figures sitting in front of them. Each had a fork. One had a spoon. Above them floated a thought bubble with a question mark inside. Emerson stared at it. "You're asking if it's safe?" The girl nodded once. He lifted one of the bowls and took a long spoonful. "There. Not poisoned?" he said, mouth full. The youngest girl giggled, a light, soft sound that surprised even her sisters. The older one shot her a quick glance but said nothing. That broke the spell. The girls slowly gathered around the table and began to eat. They did not speak. They did not touch the spoons all at once. Instead, they watched each other, mirrored each other's actions. It was like watching a routine rehearsed too many times. Emerson could see the signs. Survivors. That was what Clara used to call kids like these. Survivors who had learned to move carefully, eat cautiously, and expect nothing more than what they could carry. She had met hundreds of them during her work in literacy outreach. He used to see them through her eyes, bright, hurting children hiding stories inside their silence. He wondered how many stories were locked inside these 3. Later that morning, he called Dr. Myers, the town's only physician and longtime friend. Emerson explained the situation in plain terms. 3 girls showed up on his land. No adults, no voices, no demands, just riddles and drawings and silence. He left out the part about the notebook referencing his old books. That detail felt too sacred, too strange. "You want me to come out or bring them in?" the doctor asked. "I'll bring them in," Emerson replied. The trip to town was quiet. The girls huddled together in the back seat of his truck, all 3 sharing the same seatbelt, as if separation might shatter them. The youngest held the fox. The middle one held her notebook. The oldest watched every turn of the road. Emerson glanced at them through the mirror. "Do you all have names?" he asked gently. No answer. But the oldest girl reached into her hoodie pocket and held up 3 fingers. "3 of you." "I can count," he said with a small chuckle. She extended her hand and then pointed one finger to herself. He waited. She tapped her chest twice and then made a circular gesture in the air with her finger. Emerson blinked. It looked familiar. Is that the symbol from Book 2, he asked? The one the Princess of the North uses to signal her sisters. No reaction. But the middle girl smiled faintly, and the youngest nodded once. He felt something in his chest give way. At the clinic, Dr. Myers gave them a clean bill of health, physically at least. They were undernourished, but not dangerously so. Their clothes were patched and mismatched. Their shoes were worn through at the soles. The youngest had a faint scar on her forearm, long-healed but visible. None of them flinched at the examination, but they all tracked every movement, every door, creak, every sound outside the room. When asked for names, they stayed silent. When offered snacks, they looked to Emerson first. He had become their unspoken reference point. "I'm required to call Social Services," Myers said quietly as he walked Emerson to the truck. "They need a caseworker involved. These girls can't stay off the grid." Emerson nodded, though the idea of letting them go made his throat tighten. "Of course. Do what you have to do." The girls returned with him to the farm. As he pulled into the gravel path leading to the main house, the middle girl tapped his shoulder from the back seat. She pointed to the barn. "What about it?" he asked. She opened her notebook and quickly sketched something. A tower with a flag, a horse in front of it, a girl in a window. Red Castle, he guessed, referencing the fictional fortress from his first book. She nodded vigorously. "You want to see it?" Another nod. He turned off the truck near the barn. The 3 girls piled out their first true movement that day and approached the building with visible wonder. They walked slowly, touching the old wood, the hinges, the iron hooks along the side. It was like watching explorers rediscover a forgotten city. Inside, dust motes floated in shafts of sunlight. Hay bales lined one corner and old tools rested on pegs. The girls circled the space, pointing, naming things in silent gestures. The youngest sat down beside a small patch of dirt and began forming shapes with her hands. A circle, a star, a spiral. Emerson leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're turning it into your world, aren't you?" They did not answer, but in truth they had already begun. Later that day, a silver sedan pulled up the drive. Out stepped a tall man in a dark blazer, thin-rimmed glasses perched on the end of his nose. He introduced himself as Mr. Coulson, representative of the Regional Child Welfare Agency. His tone was warm, his voice professional, his demeanor friendly. "I heard from Dr. Myers that you've taken in 3 young girls without guardianship paperwork. Is that correct?" Emerson nodded. "They showed up on my property. Do you know their names?" "No, they haven't told me. Have they spoken at all?" "Not yet, but they communicate. Through drawings, gestures. They're organized." Mr. Coulson nodded thoughtfully. "That's not uncommon in children who've experienced trauma. Have you seen any signs of abuse?" Emerson hesitated. "Nothing visible, but they move like children who've been taught to stay invisible." Mr. Coulson made a note on a clipboard. "I'd like to meet them." "Is that all right?" Emerson called for them gently. The girls emerged from the kitchen where they had been watching his dog Baxter snore on the floor. They lined up without instruction, the oldest in the center, the youngest to her right, the middle to her left. Mr. Coulson smiled at them. "Hello, girls. My name is Mr. Coulson. I'm here to help." The girls did not move. He crouched to their level, still smiling. "You're very brave to come here. We want to make sure you're safe." The youngest flinched. Emerson saw it. So did the middle girl, who immediately stepped in front of her sister and held up her notebook. She opened it to a page showing a large X drawn across a circle. Mr. Coulson's smile faltered. "What's that?" Emerson answered. "That symbol means stop." "I see," the man said, standing slowly. "Well, I'll file the report and begin locating any previous documentation. In the meantime, I assume you're prepared to keep them here under temporary foster status." "If they'll stay," Emerson replied. As the sedan pulled away, Emerson glanced at the girls. The oldest was watching the dust trail with narrowed eyes. The middle one was already drawing. The youngest pressed her face into Baxter's fur. "Do you trust him?" Emerson asked softly. No answer. But the oldest girl shook her head once. It was not a dramatic gesture, not meant for performance. It was a simple truth told without words. That night, Emerson brought out one of Clara's old quilts and laid it over the couch. The girls refused separate beds. They huddled together, forming a triangle on the living room floor, beneath the stars visible through the tall windows. As he turned off the lamp, the middle girl held up a drawing. 4 figures under one roof, a dog beside them. Above the house, the stars were drawn with soft blue lines. Emerson looked at her, the picture, and then the other 2. "All right," he whispered. "We'll start there." And the light from the stars felt a little less cold that night. The morning sun painted the wheat fields in gold and amber as it crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the porch of Emerson's farmhouse. A rooster crowed from the back paddock. Emerson was already in the kitchen, pouring hot water into a kettle and slicing apples for oatmeal. Baxter, the old shepherd dog, lay dozing near the door, his ears flicking now and then at the clatter of the knife against the cutting board. The girls had slept in the same position he had found them the night before, curled up under Clara's quilt, their small forms barely shifting through the night. At some point, the youngest had moved her stuffed fox under her head like a pillow. The middle girl had her notebook tucked under her arm. The oldest had remained closest to the door, like a sentry standing watch even in sleep. He found himself pausing, studying them in the quiet hush of morning. They did not act like children who had been dropped by circumstance. They moved like children who had chosen to stay invisible. That was different. That meant something deeper. And while Emerson did not fully understand what brought them to his land, he knew they were looking for something. Maybe not just shelter. Maybe not just safety. Maybe they were looking for a world they once read about. A world he had imagined long ago and never expected anyone to believe in. By the time the girls stirred and made their way to the kitchen, breakfast was on the table. No one spoke, but the middle one pushed her notebook toward him. On the page was a drawing of an apple cut in half a pot of steam and 3 spoons. "You're welcome," Emerson said, managing a faint smile. "Eat as much as you like. There's more." As the girls sat and ate, Emerson tapped his fingers on the wooden table. "You know," he said slowly, "if you're going to stay here a while, it might be good to know what to call you." No one answered. The oldest girl looked up at him with the same unreadable stare. Then she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded paper square. She handed it to him carefully. Emerson unfolded it and found 3 hand-drawn symbols. The first was a flower with sharp petals. The second was a swirl like a wind spiral. The third was a star with uneven arms. Next to each symbol was a small stick figure. "They are not names," he said quietly, "but they are something." The middle girl tapped the swirl. Then she pointed to herself. "Wind," he said aloud. "Or maybe breeze." She smiled and held up her notebook to reveal a page that said, in blocky handwriting, "Emma." He nodded. "Emma." The youngest pointed to the star. Then she touched the tip of her nose. "And you." She reached into her tiny coat pocket and produced a crumpled tag, the kind you might find inside a child's jacket or bag. It read, "Sophie M." "Sophie Emerson," murmured. "That's a beautiful name." The oldest girl was silent. She tapped the flower, but offered no other hint. Emerson tried. "Are you Lily?" The girl blinked, but gave no response. He waited a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. We will call you what you are ready to be called." That seemed to please her, or at least it did not upset her. Later that morning, the girls took to the porch, and then to the yard where they wandered the fence line like travelers returning to familiar ground. Sophie ran her hand across the top of the whitewashed railing, humming softly to herself. Emma sat near the garden, drawing furiously in her notebook. The oldest girl, still unnamed, walked the perimeter with purpose. At noon, Emerson found them gathered in the barn again. This time they had begun organizing. Hay bales were moved into neat shapes. A blanket from the porch had been dragged into the corner and fashioned into a tent. Old saddle pads were stacked into makeshift chairs. One bucket had a string tied to its handle and was being hoisted and lowered like a pulley system from the loft above. It was not random play. It was construction. "Red Castle," Emerson said aloud, standing in the doorway with his hands in his coat pockets. "You are turning this place into the castle from the story." Emma nodded and pointed to a corner of the barn where a piece of plywood now leaned at an angle. A stick had been placed next to it with a red scarf fluttering from the end. "A flag," he said. Sophie clapped. Emerson walked inside slowly. "You remember the story? The 3 sisters, the Red Castle, the fields that turned gold when the truth was spoken." The girls were already deep in the next phase of their vision. By late afternoon, Emma handed him a new drawing. It showed the farmhouse, the barn, the fields, and new labels written in childlike letters. Farmhouse was now Main Keep. The barn was Red Castle. The wheat fields were Golden Plains. The creek in the south pasture was labeled Whisper Water. The tree line was Edge of the Unknown. Emerson studied it for a long moment. "You are renaming my whole world," he said softly, turning it into the storybook map. Emma just smiled and added a compass rose in the corner. That night, after the girls had settled into their quilt nest in the living room, Emerson sat in his study for the first time in years. He turned on the lamp and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a stack of journals, old fountain pens, and a notebook wrapped in string. It was the last story Clara had helped him outline before the accident, a continuation of The Maker and the Lost Ones, never written. He untied the string. The first page read, "When the story ends, the silence begins. But sometimes silence is where the story waits to be heard." He stared at it for a long time. In the morning, a truck arrived with groceries. He had placed the order the night before, realizing the house lacked anything remotely child-friendly. Cereal, fruit snacks, milk that was not powdered, bandages with cartoon animals. He did not know what girls liked, so he ordered a bit of everything. The girls watched from the window as the driver unloaded bags onto the porch. Sophie peeked through the curtain. Emma wrote something down. The oldest girl stood behind them, silent, unreadable. After the truck left, Emerson invited them to help unpack. They joined him cautiously in the kitchen. Emma opened a box of animal crackers and placed 3 on a napkin for each girl. Sophie made a small fox out of hers. The oldest girl simply ate them without a word. Later that day, they went exploring. The girls followed him through the wheat fields as he pointed out the irrigation ditches, the chicken coop, the old smokehouse, and the tool shed he rarely used. They asked no questions, but their eyes absorbed everything. Emma drew as they walked. Sophie whispered to her stuffed fox. The oldest girl walked beside Emerson, her hand occasionally brushing against his coat sleeve, as if to reassure herself that he was still there. As they approached the silo, Emerson paused. "This used to be Clara's favorite place," he said. "You can see the stars from the top. On clear nights, it feels like you are standing at the edge of the world." The girls looked up. It was tall, weathered, silent. "Want to go up?" he asked. Emma nodded. The climb was cautious but steady. Emerson went first, Sophie second, Emma next, and the oldest girl last. When they reached the top, the view opened up like a painting. Wheat danced in the wind below. The sky stretched on forever. Emma pulled out her notebook. Sophie sat at his feet holding the fox. The oldest girl walked to the edge and stared out in every direction. Then she turned and looked directly at him. She raised one hand and made a small gesture. Circle, line, cross. He froze. That was the sacred sign of the Watcher's oath. The symbol from his 3rd book. A promise of protection made by the main character to the 3 lost girls in the story. He had invented that sign. No one outside the books should have known it. But here it was drawn in the air by a child who had never heard him speak. He knelt beside her slowly. "Do you remember the story? Or did someone read it to you?" She pointed to herself. Then she tapped her chest, then made the sign again. "I am one of the lost ones," he whispered. She nodded. And in that moment, Emerson Blake realized what they had come looking for was not just shelter, not just food, not just warmth. They had come for the ending. And somehow they had decided he was the one who still had it. The wind blew harder that week. It whipped through the wheat fields and rattled the barn doors. The farmhouse groaned at night with the weight of winter closing in. But inside, it was warm. Emerson kept the stove burning and made sure the quilt nest in the living room was stocked with extra pillows. The girls, as always, slept close to one another. Sophie curled around her stuffed fox, Emma with her notebook beneath her arm. The oldest girl, whom Emerson had now come to call Lily, in his thoughts always facing the door. Days took on a rhythm. The mornings were spent feeding the chickens and walking the land. Emerson explained the purpose of each tool, each row of crops, each rusted machine that sat quiet under the shed roof. The girls absorbed everything like sponges, though still not one of them spoke aloud. Afternoons were for Red Castle, the barn where Emma continued adding to the map. The place had become more than a game now. They had assigned names to rooms, rules to the spaces. The hayloft was the watchtower. The old horse stall was the armory. Even the milking station had become the forge of whispered dreams. But beneath the play and the quiet peace, something had shifted in the air. Emerson felt it first when he saw the tire tracks at the edge of his property. They were not his, and they were not from the grocery delivery. These were fresh, deep, heavy. He had not heard a car. But someone had been there. He found a small paper tucked under the porch mat that night. It was not from the girls. He recognized the stationery. Government issue. It read, "Mr. Colson will return for a formal welfare check within 72 hours. There was no signature. The next morning he called his friend Miriam Ames, a lawyer from town, who had handled his estate matters after Clara's death. She picked up after 2 rings. "Miriam, it's Emerson. I need some legal advice. Her voice was alert at once. All right. Is this about the children? Yes. I heard from Myers. He said social services got involved. Mr. Coulson came by. He seemed pleasant enough, but the girls froze when he approached them. One of them even held up a stop sign in her notebook. Miriam was silent for a beat. That's concerning. I think he is connected to whatever they are running from. You think he is dangerous? I think he is hiding something. And I think these girls know it. Miriam's voice turned sharper. Have they told you anything? Not directly. But through drawings, through signs, I think they were placed somewhere they should not have been. And I think one of them, Lily, is not even in the system. That's a bold guess. She has no tags, no medical records, nothing. The other two at least had small identifiers. Sophie had a label in her coat. Emma signed her name. But Lily, she only gestures. And her signs come straight out of the books Clara and I wrote. Symbols we never published, ones Clara used in her classroom visits. Miriam exhaled. Send me pictures of everything, the notes, the drawings, and keep them safe. I plan to. They ended the call, and Emerson walked back into the kitchen where Emma and Sophie were playing with measuring cups and sugar packets, making pretend tea for Baxter. Lily stood nearby, her arms crossed as she watched the window. Everything all right? Emerson asked. Lily pointed to the porch. You saw him again? She nodded, then drew a square in the air and tapped it twice. A book, a notebook. She nodded again, then made the stop sign gesture. Someone came to look through the house. No answer. Emerson lowered himself to her eye level. Do you trust me? She hesitated. Then slowly she raised her hand and touched her fingers to her chest, then extended her palm toward him. The symbol of trust. From the 5th storybook. A sign given only when the guardian proves himself. His throat tightened. All right, he said. I will not let them take you. But I need to understand what happened. Emma, having watched the exchange, flipped through her notebook and presented him with a drawing. It showed a tall building with windows, grated ones, a room with 4 beds, a camera on the ceiling, 3 small figures behind a locked door. A man in a suit stood outside the door holding a clipboard, no face drawn, but in the corner of the picture was a trash bin, and sticking out of it was a piece of paper with Lily's symbol on it, the flower. He studied it for a long time. You mean they erased her? Emma nodded. Sophie pointed to the trash can and made a tearing motion with her hands. Emerson sat down heavily in the nearest chair. They were not runaways from a loving home. They had escaped a cover-up. That night he stayed up late searching public databases for anything on foster homes and private shelters in the region. He found records on 2 facilities, both under contract with the state. One was managed by a nonprofit called Haven Reach, the director Douglas Coulson. He clicked through articles, mostly fluff, donations, ribbon cuttings, community events. But buried in a complaint 3 years prior was a redacted letter from a former volunteer suggesting inappropriate admission practices and misreported occupancy rates. No charges were filed. Emerson stared at the screen. The words blurred. It all made sense now. Coulson was not just a bureaucrat. He was the man in charge of a business built on children like these children no one kept track of. By the next morning, Miriam had confirmed his fears. One of the girls, Emma, has an emergency contact filed in a hospital database. No formal foster record. Sophie has a partial file, only a first name and a location marker from a now-closed placement office. But Lily... Nothing. Emerson finished. Not a single trace, Miriam said. Which means either she was placed under the table or her paperwork was intentionally removed. Can we protect them? Temporarily? Yes. But if Coulson makes a formal petition, we need proof of abuse, neglect, or endangerment. Otherwise, the court may rule in his favor even with all your resources. There has to be another way. Miriam paused. Have they given you anything that might show what happened inside that shelter? Emerson looked down at the folder of drawings on the table. They may have. That afternoon he sat with Emma in the barn. The others were resting after lunch, but Emma was scribbling furiously, her little hands stained with crayon and pencil marks. Emma, he said gently, "Can I ask you something?" She looked up. "Can you draw the room where you met Lily?" She blinked, then nodded. For the next 20 minutes, Emerson watched her create a detailed, haunting map. She sketched the hallway, the barred door, the rooms, and the sign outside HRC, the abbreviation for Haven Reach Center. Then, in a new page, she drew a screen, a television or monitor showing the girls sleeping. Next to it, a tall figure watching. Above that figure was a badge. She pointed to the figure and drew a small flower beside it. The same flower symbol. Emma nodded, then drew a trash can. "They knew who she was," Emerson whispered. "And they got rid of the record." The next day, Mr. Coulson returned. He arrived in a black car, same as before, but this time he brought a briefcase and an assistant who remained outside. He stepped onto the porch with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake." "Come in," Emerson said flatly. They sat in the living room. Lily, Emma, and Sophie remained in the kitchen, visible but quiet. Lily never took her eyes off Coulson. "I wanted to follow up in person before we initiate formal steps," Coulson said, unfolding a few documents. "Our hope is for voluntary transfer. It will be simpler for you and ultimately better for the girls." "I disagree," Emerson said. Coulson raised his eyebrows. "On what basis? I have a lawyer. I have medical records. I also have a drawing that shows a child being erased from your facility." Coulson paused. "That is quite a claim, and I intend to prove it." Coulson's smile tightened. "You are welcome to try, but this situation will be reviewed by a judge soon. I suggest you prepare your home for that." Emerson stood. "It already is." Coulson gathered his papers and left without another word. That evening, Emerson found the girls in the barn again. They had rebuilt the red castle stronger than before. Extra hay walls, more flags, better hiding places. He walked to the center of their map, knelt and opened his notebook for the first time in years. "I am going to write your story," he said, "and this time no one gets left behind." The girls surrounded him. Sophie leaned her head on his arm. Emma handed him her notebook. Lily made the trust gesture again, then picked up a crayon and began to draw. The ending was not written yet, but they were writing it together. The frost clung thick to the barn roof, the next morning turning Red Castle into a shimmering crown beneath the winter sun. Inside, Emerson lit the old kerosene lamp and watched as its golden light spilled across the girls' latest creations. The barn walls were now papered with drawings, maps, and coded messages only the girls seemed to understand. Emma had taken to taping her work across the beams and doors, each picture capturing fragments of their past and whispers of their present. Lily, now more fully known by the name Emerson had quietly assigned to her, spent most of her time reinforcing the hay bale barrier around their throne room, occasionally pausing to listen at the barn door as if she expected trouble to come knocking. Sophie clutched her fox and watched her older sister with wide, wary eyes. Inside that warm, hay-scented haven, Emerson worked with Emma to carefully catalog each drawing she offered. She had begun including more symbols, badges, keys, hidden cameras, the letter H wrapped in barbed wire. One image in particular caught his attention. It depicted the outline of a building like the ones drawn in architectural blueprints, only this one had no doors. "They couldn't get out," Emerson murmured, tracing the lines. "This is what they escaped." Emma said nothing, only handed him a second drawing, this time of 3 girls climbing through a window beneath a crescent moon. In the foreground was a shadowy figure watching from the woods. He recognized the cloak and walking stick drawn next to the figure. It was the Maker, the fictional guardian from his books, watching from afar. "You saw me?" he asked softly, though he knew she would not answer in words. Emma looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. He had been there the night they ran, or at least near enough. Maybe they had seen his porch light. Maybe they had recognized his farm from a page in one of his books. Somehow they had followed the clues, not just in the story, but in real life. And somehow they had found him. That afternoon, Miriam Ames arrived. The sound of her old station wagon crackling up the gravel road stirred the girls from their quiet play. Lily moved first, standing stiffly at the kitchen window. Emma followed and peered over her shoulder. Sophie stood behind them, clutching the fox tighter. Emerson opened the door before Miriam reached the porch. "Thanks for coming," he said. She stepped inside, tugging off her gloves. "You have no idea how much this reminds me of your wife. Clara would have turned this house into a sanctuary the minute those girls crossed the gate." He nodded. "That is what I am trying to do." Miriam entered the living room where the girls had returned to their drawing. She approached them slowly, lowering herself to their level. "I am a friend of Emerson's," she said gently. "My name is Miriam. I am here to help." Lily remained stoic, but Emma nodded once. Sophie tilted her head, and after a long pause held out her fox for Miriam to see. "That is a fine creature," Miriam said, smiling. "Does it have a name?" Sophie whispered something so softly that only Emerson caught it. "Patch," he repeated aloud. "She said his name is Patch." Miriam glanced at him in surprise. "She spoke to you?" "That is the first time," Emerson said quietly, "but only when she is holding him." Miriam stood. "I brought something." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "I compiled the drawings you scanned and printed. I paired them with legal notes, dates, and the complaint from the old shelter volunteer who filed that report years ago." Emerson took the folder. "Is it enough? It will get us a hearing. It will at least delay any forced removal while we petition for emergency guardianship." From the other room, the sound of paper rustling and crayon scribbling resumed. Emma was already working on a new page. Emerson found himself hoping it was something softer than surveillance cameras and escape maps. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the fields in rust-colored light, the girls gathered near the fireplace. Emerson had started reading aloud from the first book in his series, the one Clara had helped him finish years ago. At first, the girls sat quietly, each clutching her usual comfort. But when he reached the scene where the Maker teaches the lost ones how to build a map out of memory, something shifted. Emma got up, fetched her notebook, and sat beside him. She flipped to a blank page and began sketching. Lily sat closer. Sophie curled up by his leg, Patch tucked under her chin. By the end of the chapter, Emma had drawn a small map of their day: Red Castle, Whisperwater, the Main. Keep the edge of the wheat. Above the map, she had written in careful block letters, "Safe today." Emerson showed Miriam. "She is documenting security with stories," Miriam said. "It is brilliant. She is giving you evidence in the only language she feels safe using." Emerson stared at the phrase, "safe today." It implied that yesterday had not been. It implied that tomorrow might not be. The next morning they received word from the county courthouse. A preliminary hearing had been scheduled for the following Thursday. Miriam would present the petition for guardianship and submit the collected evidence. The girls would be required to attend. "That is going to be rough," Miriam said. "We cannot force them to speak, but the court will expect some form of testimony." Emerson thought for a long time. "What if they do not speak with words? What do you mean they speak in symbols, in signs? What if we let them tell the story their way?" Miriam considered it. "You want them to present in their silent language. Yes, through drawings, movement, whatever they trust. It will be unconventional." "But truthful," Emerson said, "and powerful. These girls know how to show the truth. They have been doing it since the day they arrived." Miriam looked at him carefully. "If you can get the judge to allow it, it might work." That afternoon, Emerson brought out a large poster board and 3 sets of markers. He laid them on the living room table and sat down on the floor beside it. "I want to help you tell your story," he said to the girls. Emma looked intrigued. Lily remained still. Sophie sat down cross-legged, watching the markers. "I do not want to ask questions," Emerson added. "I want you to decide what to say, what to show, what to leave out. This is yours." Emma picked up a black marker. She began with a circle in the center of the board. Around it she drew small stick figures. 3 girls, a fox, a tall man holding a book, a dog beside him. Emerson watched the picture unfold. Lily moved next. She drew a thick door with a keyhole and eyes peering out. Next to it she placed a single flower symbol scratched in heavy red ink. Then a trash bin with a hand reaching in. Sophie finally leaned forward. She added stars above the house and placed Patch right in the center of it all. At the top of the board, Emma wrote 3 words. "This is home." Miriam, watching from the hall, wiped at her eyes. That night, Emerson added a drawing of his own, a simple one. A farmhouse surrounded by wheat, a porch with 3 girls sitting on the steps. Above it all, a handwritten note. Sometimes the story finds the writer, sometimes the ending writes itself. By the time Thursday arrived, the poster board had grown into a full-story tapestry. Pages of Emma's drawings had been taped in sequence. Lily had built a miniature replica of Red Castle using blocks and labeled each section with signs from the books. Sophie had constructed a little flag with a star and a fox in its center. They packed everything into boxes and loaded them into the truck. As they drove toward the courthouse, Sophie whispered again. Safe Emerson glanced in the mirror. "Yes," he said, "I am with you." They reached the courthouse under a gray sky. The girls held tight to each other's hands. Emerson walked beside them, his presence steady. Inside the building, people turned to stare. 3 silent girls. A man with a briefcase of children's drawings. A woman with a folder full of legal challenges. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a serious face and silver hair, eyed them carefully as they entered the chamber. Miriam approached the bench. "Your Honor, with permission, the children would like to present their statement in a format that reflects their communication style. They do not speak, but they tell the truth in drawings and signs. May we proceed?" The judge studied the girls. "I will allow it." The presentation unfolded in silence. Emma unrolled the tapestry and placed it on an easel. She stepped aside. Lily pointed to the trash can and the flower symbol. She made the stop gesture and drew a line across her chest. Sophie held up Patch and tapped her chest twice. Then Emerson stepped forward and spoke. "These children have been through something most adults would never survive, and yet they still find ways to express truth. They have taught me more about courage than I ever expected to learn again." The judge leaned forward. "Do they want to stay with you?" Lily stepped forward. She raised her hand, placed it over her heart, then extended it toward Emerson. "Trust." Then she took a marker and wrote a single word on the board. "Family." The room was silent. The judge set down her pen. "I have heard enough for today." And for the first time in years, Emerson believed in the power of stories again. Because this one was being written in real time. And he was not the only author anymore. The courthouse steps were cold beneath Emerson's boots as he stood under the sullen Nebraska sky. The clouds hung low, pressing against the rooftops like the heavy weight on his chest. At his side, Lily stood tall and silent, her frame wiry but unyielding like a sapling that had survived one too many storms. Emma clutched the worn portfolio that held their story drawings, her fingers trembling despite her determined grip. Sophie leaned into Miriam's coat, whispering to her stuffed fox Patch in a voice too soft for the wind to catch. Emerson looked down at the 3 girls. His throat tightened. These children, silent and small, had somehow cracked open something in him he thought had turned to stone years ago. They had not spoken often, and yet they had said more than most ever dared. And now they were about to be spoken for, judged by laws written with none of them in mind. The great wooden doors creaked open. Emerson led the way inside. The courtroom was warmer, but only by temperature. The air was thick with low murmurs. Some recognized Emerson Blake by name, a recluse once known for his children's books long ago buried in grief. Others glanced at the 3 girls and whispered theories. Some said he had found them in the woods, like ghosts from an old folk tale. Others believed they were figments of his broken mind. The truth was stranger than either. At the front, Mr. Coulson already sat beside his court-appointed attorney, a lean man with sharp cheekbones, slicked hair, and a silver pen that he kept clicking like a metronome. Coulson himself had a faint smile, one that did not touch his eyes. His suit was too neat, too smooth for a man running a shelter that claimed to be overworked and underfunded. When Emerson and Miriam entered with the girls, Coulson's gaze flicked up. He smirked as if he already knew the outcome. The judge entered. She was the same as before, though her expression had cooled. Her robes rustled like dried corn husks as she sat and motioned for the courtroom to follow. This hearing the clerk read aloud concerns the petition brought by Mr. Emerson Blake for emergency guardianship of 3 unnamed minor females currently under disputed state care. Miriam rose first. Her posture was straight, her words crisp as she outlined the timeline of events since the girls had appeared on Emerson's land. She listed the girls' strange communication patterns, the consistent themes in their drawings, the discrepancy between supposed state records and what the girls remembered, or rather what they drew. She presented Emma's drawing of the hallway with no exits, Lily's scribbled signs of the red castle, Sophie's stars and foxes, and the symbols that matched missing pages from the shelter's registration logs. Miriam ended with a statement that turned the murmurs silent. These girls are not just survivors. They are witnesses. They may not speak your language, but they have not been silent. They have been shouting in crayons, and the only one who listened was Emerson Blake. The state attorney stood next. He was efficient and cold, like a man arguing over zoning codes, not children's futures. "Your Honor," he said, "while the court may sympathize with Mr. Blake's efforts, the fact remains he is not a registered foster caregiver. He has no legal claim to these minors. The evidence presented today consists of children's artwork and personal testimony. These girls should be placed into certified state housing until a permanent solution is found." He gestured toward Mr. Coulson, who nodded slowly like someone asked to pose for a painting. Then it was Emerson's turn. He rose from his seat and walked to the center of the room, the girl's story tapestry rolled under one arm. His boots echoed on the polished wood floor. He paused, unrolled the tapestry across the judge's bench, and said nothing for a long moment. The court waited. "These are not drawings," Emerson finally said, his voice gravel low and steady. "These are declarations, memories, warnings." He pointed to one drawing, a hallway with no doors. "This is where they lived. No way out. Just a corridor where the lights never worked. I found this same layout described in a statement from a shelter volunteer, a place that was quietly shut down 2 years ago. No paperwork remains." He turned the page to another, a crushed flower in a plastic cup, a sticker from a prescription pill bottle issued to no child on record. "That bottle, I found it in their belongings. The pills were expired and unprescribed. These girls were sedated, not treated, caged, not sheltered." He looked up. "You want testimony? I can give you none, because these girls cannot speak the way we do. But they gave me this, a record. One only a man who once lost his words would know how to read." The room held its breath. Then Lily rose. Her legs wobbled only slightly as she walked to the center of the room. She held up a single page, 3 tiny stick figures slipping through a fence under the moon. Emma followed, showing a colored page with Emerson's farmhouse drawn in green crayon labeled in her looping hand safe. Sophie came last. She held up a picture of a fox curled around 3 stars inside a heart. None of them spoke. Then Lily raised one hand and formed a symbol with her fingers. Emerson's heart clenched. Family. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom like moths. The judge's eyes lingered on the girls for a long moment before her attention turned back to Emerson. "I want to believe you, Mr. Blake," she said, "but belief is not always enough. We have no medical records, no birth certificates, and no legal documentation tying these girls to any official database. Without that, how do I justify stripping custody from the state?" Before Emerson could respond, Miriam stepped forward again. "That is the problem, Your Honor," she said. "They do not exist because someone ensured they would not. Erased records, sealed logs, children shuffled in and out with new names and no history. These 3 are only the ones who escaped." She turned toward the opposing bench. "And the man who helped make that possible is sitting right over there." All heads turned to Mr. Coulson. His smile faltered for the first time. The judge narrowed her eyes. "Do you have evidence?" Miriam inhaled slowly. "Not in the form this court usually demands. But I have an anonymous statement from a shelter volunteer, drawings that match, vanished property blueprints, timestamps in the girls' notebooks that line up with dates of suspicious medical supply orders." She paused. Her voice lowered. "Your Honor, these girls are not just 3 orphans. They are 3 keys to a story someone has tried very hard to bury, and if we send them back into the system tonight, I fear we will never see them again." The judge looked at the girls, then Emerson, then the drawings. A long silence. Finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. This court finds sufficient grounds for emergency guardianship. Effective immediately, Emerson Blake will be granted temporary custody of all 3 minors pending a formal investigation. Furthermore, I am ordering a state-level audit of the Nebraska Children's Haven, including a forensic review of its digital archives and its former staff, including one Mr. Colson. Mr. Colson's face darkened, but he remained silent. One final note the judge added softer this time. I will assign a trauma therapist with experience in nonverbal expression. These girls deserve a voice whatever form it takes. The gavel struck once. The sound rang like a promise. The courtroom erupted into movement. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled. The bailiff's voice called for order, but Emerson stood still. The girls turned to him. Lily took his hand. Emma leaned into his side, her face flushed and bright. Sophie held Patch out to him like an offering. Outside, the rain had begun, thick warm sheets washing over the courthouse steps, as if the skies themselves had been holding their breath. Inside the truck, as they drove back to the farm, Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. Safe now, she asked, her voice small but clear. Emerson looked into the rearview mirror. Her eyes were tired but glowing. He nodded. Yes, we are safe now. When they arrived, the fields glistened in the storm's aftermath. The barn red castle stood with its windows lit like lanterns from within. The wind had stilled. The girls raced ahead. They flung open the barn doors and disappeared into the warmth laughter trailing like candle smoke. Emerson remained on the porch for a long time. Then slowly he opened the notebook he had not touched in 10 years. This time the pen did not hesitate. He wrote. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a world washed clean. Thin beams of morning sunlight crept across the porch of the farmhouse and danced on the dewy grass below. Emerson stood by the window, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, watching the girls as they ran barefoot through the wet grass. Their laughter was soft and cautious, like birds testing their wings again after a long winter. Lily led the charge, her short hair wild and clinging to her forehead. Emma trailed close behind, arms raised like she was flying. Sophie twirled in slow circles, her fox held aloft like a kite. They had barely slept the night before. None of them had wanted to. Emerson had caught them sneaking out of bed twice, once to check the locks on the doors, and once to leave a crayon drawing on his desk. The drawing had shown a barn under the moonlight, and 3 smiling figures waving from inside. They had labeled it with a word. Home. Emerson could still feel the echo of that word in his chest. He took another sip and stepped out onto the porch. The wind was gentle now, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and wildflowers. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil as he walked toward the barn, the red castle. He found the girls already inside, rearranging blankets and cushions like royalty, preparing their throne room. The lanterns from the night before still glowed faintly, their batteries low, casting a soft amber hue over everything. Lily was sweeping hay to the corners with a child-sized broom Emerson had carved for her 2 days earlier. Emma had set up her folding easel and was mixing colors on a plastic palette. Sophie sat cross-legged with a row of pine cones lined up in front of her, each one named, and introduced aloud to Patch. Sir Pricklebottom, she whispered to the largest pine cone. You protect the door. Emerson leaned against the frame and knocked gently. You all moved in? He asked. Emma grinned and nodded. Almost. We just need curtains, made from what he asked. She shrugged. Magic and imagination. He smiled, then walked inside. The Red Castle had been many things in its lifetime, a working barn, a hay storage loft, a failed chicken coop experiment, but never had it been this alive. The girls had transformed it. Crayon murals lined the walls, now stitched together with paper clips and tape. Strings of mismatched holiday lights hung from the rafters. A wooden crate had become a stage, and a wheelbarrow now served as a royal carriage. Lily walked up to him and placed something in his palm. It was a key. Or rather, it was one of his old house keys, bent slightly at the edges and tied with a red ribbon. You said this was your safe place, she said. Now it's ours too. He closed his fingers around it. Thank you. Later that morning, Miriam arrived carrying a tote bag of paperwork and snacks. The girls rushed to greet her like a visiting queen, wrapping her in tangled hugs. "They really are different here," she said quietly to Emerson as they watched the girls build a tower from cardboard boxes. Calmer. Lighter. He nodded. They know no one's coming to take them away. For the first time, they believe it. Still, Miriam added, glancing toward the truck parked at the edge of the driveway, "This isn't over." Emerson followed her gaze. The truck belonged to Deputy Paul Whitaker, the county sheriff's right hand. He had come 3 times this week alone, each time under the pretense of checking on the children's welfare. Emerson knew it was more than that. As if on cue, the door opened, and Paul stepped out, adjusting his badge and brushing dust from his boots. Mourning, he called out, his tone too casual. Emerson stepped forward, jaw tight. "Something you need?" Deputy Paul offered a half smile. "Just routine. You know how it is. Higher-ups want to make sure all court orders are being respected, especially with certain shelters now under investigation." Emerson said nothing. Miriam moved beside him, arms crossed. Paul's gaze wandered to the barn where the girls were now peeking through the slats in the wall. He sighed. "They seem happy," he said almost reluctantly. "I'll admit that." Emerson raised a brow. But you know how people talk. About you. About the girls. No one can find their names in the system, Emerson. No one can prove where they came from. That makes people nervous. It should make them angry, Miriam said sharply. At the system, not the children. Paul scratched the back of his neck. "Just keep doing what you're doing. But watch your back. Coulson has lawyers. He has money. And he's not going to sit quietly." With that, the deputy turned and walked away. As the truck rolled off down the dirt road, Miriam sighed. "I don't like it," she said. "I don't either," Emerson replied. "But we'll be ready." He spent the rest of the day with the girls, planting sunflower seeds behind the barn and painting new signs for each of their garden rows. Lily insisted on labeling hers Lily's Army. Emma's sign said colors and carrots. Sophie simply drew a fox wearing a crown. That evening, as the sun dipped below the edge of the wheat fields, they gathered in the Red Castle for what Emma called the first official family council. Emerson sat on an overturned bucket while the girls arranged themselves on crates and cushions. "We need rules," Lily said, standing with her arms folded. "Royal rules," agreed, said Emma, dipping her brush in yellow paint. "But nice ones." Sophie raised a finger. "First rule, everyone eats pancakes on Saturdays. Second rule," Lily added, "no one goes to bed sad. If you're sad, you tell someone, or you draw." Emerson looked around at them and smiled. "Any rules for me?" Emma nodded. "You have to write again. Every day." He laughed. "That's a big one. You promised," Lily said. He held up both hands. "All right. Writing starts tomorrow." And Sophie added, climbing into his lap, "You have to let us stay. Forever." The room grew quiet. Emerson looked down at her, saw the weight behind her words, the plea wrapped in hope. "I want that more than anything," he said softly. "And I'll fight as long as I have to." The girls leaned into him one by one like petals folding into a flower. Later, after they were tucked in, after the barn lights had dimmed, Emerson sat outside with Miriam under the stars. "Do you think they'll try to take them?" he asked. Miriam hesitated. "Coulson is not finished. If he's part of something larger, something darker, he will not give up 3 girls who know too much. Then we stay ready." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You're not just protecting them, you know?" He tilted his head. "They're healing you too." He smiled but did not deny it. The stars above Red Castle burned brighter that night. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of new soil and old promises. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called across the hills. But closer still, laughter echoed from the barn like the beating heart of something newly born. And inside, Emerson Blake began a new story, with 3 girls as its heroes, and a castle made of red wood and second chances. The Red Castle glowed in the twilight like a beacon. From a distance, it looked like something out of a storybook, a barn-turned sanctuary lit by strings of mismatched lights, laughter humming through its walls, and the silhouettes of 3 girls dancing across the floorboards. Emerson watched from the front porch of the farmhouse, mug of chamomile in hand, as the breeze carried the faint notes of Sophie's singing. She had been singing more lately, not loud, not for an audience, but just enough to say she was no longer afraid of her own voice. Emerson set down his mug and made his way down the path toward the barn. He stepped inside and paused to take it in. Emma was painting a canvas propped against a bale of hay. It was a swirling mix of reds and oranges, the shape of a rising sun taking form beneath her brush. Lily was constructing a makeshift bookshelf from 2 crates and a broken plank. Sophie, of course, sat curled near the lantern, whispering secrets to Patch and her collection of pine cones. "You all planning to stay up all night again?" Emerson teased gently. Lily looked up. "We are preparing." For what he asked, stepping closer. "For our big day," Emma answered without looking up. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Emerson frowned. "What happens tomorrow?" Sophie stood and walked to him, placing something in his hand. It was an old calendar page. A date had been circled in red crayon. Tomorrow's date. Emerson studied it. Did something happen on this day? Before Lily nodded slowly. "It is when we left the bad place." Emma added, "When we ran." And Sophie whispered, "When we lost her." Emerson looked at them all, his chest tightening. They had never spoken of a mother before, never mentioned a name or a face, only shadows. "Do you want to talk about her?" he asked gently. Lily shook her head. "Not talk. Just remember. Then we will." That night, Emerson stayed with them in the barn. He brought blankets and books, candles, and cocoa. They built a nest near the hayloft and piled in together. The girls took turns telling stories not about the past, but of what might have been. Emma imagined their mother as a singer who used to hum lullabies that turned into wind. Lily described a woman with strong hands who taught them how to braid ropes and build boats from leaves. Sophie said nothing, but she pressed her fox into Emerson's side and leaned her head on his arm. When they fell asleep, he sat up long after watching the candlelight flicker. Morning came with stillness. The fields shimmered with dew. Miriam arrived early, her arms full of fresh bread and dried lavender. "I thought today might be hard," she said. "It already is," Emerson replied. By mid-morning, the girls were unusually quiet. No one painted. No one danced. Instead, they gathered around an old stump in the backyard where Emerson had set out small stones and wildflowers. They began to build something. First, Lily arranged the stones in a careful circle. Emma added sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and mint. Sophie stood at the center and placed a small drawing folded into a paper heart. Emerson approached. "She was real," Lily said without looking up. "Even if no one else remembers her." "We remember," Emma added. Sophie simply nodded. Then Lily lit a single match. The flame flickered in the wind, caught the corner of the paper heart, and slowly consumed it. The herbs crackled. Smoke curled into the sky, soft and sweet like a farewell. They said no words, but their silence was heavier than any hymn. Miriam stood at a distance, her eyes misting. Afterward, the girls went inside without a sound. Emerson followed them, unsure if they needed space or comfort. By late afternoon, they had returned to the barn and resumed work on their safe library, a growing shelf of drawings, notes, stories, and symbols, only they fully understood. Then came the knock. Hard, sharp, unannounced. Emerson froze. Miriam answered the front door and stepped back immediately as 2 men in suits entered without asking. Behind them, Deputy Paul appeared, expression tense. Emerson Blake, the taller of the two, asked, "Yes, we are from the State Office of Family and Child Services. We are here to execute a formal retrieval order. Effective immediately, the 3 minors in your custody are to be returned to transitional housing pending final review of guardianship." "No," Miriam said instantly. "You cannot just barge in without notice." "We have a signed document," the man said, holding up a folded set of papers. We were advised of inconsistencies in the guardianship process, concerns of emotional manipulation, and a lack of legal placement authority. Advised by whom, Emerson asked. But he already knew. Mr. Coulson. The men moved forward. Where are the children? One asked. You are not taking them, Emerson said, stepping into his path. We are following court protocol. Protocol, Emerson's voice rose. You mean the same protocol that let them slip through the system unnoticed for years. The same protocol that turned a blind eye to their abuse. Sir, they are not your responsibility anymore. They are mine. We have authorization. But before they could move again, the barn door burst open. Lily stood there, her chin raised. Behind her, Emma held a bundle of drawings to her chest. Sophie clutched Patch and looked straight at the strangers. I know you, Lily said. You visited the place with the cages. The men froze. I remember your shoes, Emma added. They squeaked on the tile. We used to count the squeaks to know how long we had before they opened the door. Sophie stepped forward. You never looked at us. The older of the two men paled. I want you to leave, Lily said. You cannot just... I said, leave. Her voice cracked like a whip through the air. Deputy Paul stepped forward, then holding up his hand. That's enough, he said to the men. This is wrong. They turned to him. You're supposed to enforce this. Paul shook his head. I changed my mind. I have daughters of my own. I wouldn't let anyone drag them away without hearing their voice. One of the men scowled. You'll answer for this. Maybe, Paul replied. But I'll sleep at night. The two agents left in silence, their papers crumpled and unread. Emerson exhaled slowly, heart pounding. The girls rushed to him and clung to his sides. Paul stayed behind for a moment. This was a mistake waiting to happen, he said. You need to prepare for more. I know. But even as he spoke the words, Emerson looked around at the girls and knew one thing for certain. They were not leaving. Not today. Not ever. That night they built a new tower of stones beside the old one. This time they wrote a name in the dirt beside it. Marisol. It was the first time Emerson had heard it. Their mother's name. The stars came out slowly, one by one, as if called forward by that whispered word. Marisol. The name lived now, not just in memory, but in earth and flame and ink. It joined the others in the Red Castle's library, in the songs Sophie hummed, in the lines Emma painted, in the defenses Lily raised around them all. Inside the barn, as the wind howled over the hills, the girls slept soundly, and Emerson sat by the lantern writing their story into the quiet hours of the night, not to save them, but to honor them, because they had saved him first. It was the last warm stretch of autumn before the Nebraska winds would turn sharp and silver. Emerson rose early that morning, woken not by his usual dreams or the sunrise leaking through the curtains, but by the sound of laughter rolling in from the barn. It was the kind of laughter that cracked open something inside him, joy, unfenced and unfiltered. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The girls had been up since dawn, it seemed. Sophie was crouched near the chicken coop, whispering secrets to the hens as she scattered feed. Emma had climbed the garden fence and was sketching on a wide plank of birchwood, using the stub of a blue chalk crayon. Lily, always the builder, was dragging planks and broken wheels toward the open side of the barn. What's all this? Emerson called. Lily turned, beaming. We are building the garden gate. The one from the stories, he asked, stepping closer. Yes, she said, brushing dirt off her jeans. The one you wrote about. The place where the prince finally stopped being sad. Sophie looked up from her hens and added softly, and where the girls got to stay. Emerson's heart clenched. I thought you three did not believe in fairy tales. We don't, Emma said without glancing up. But sometimes fairy tales believe in us. They worked until noon, Emerson helping them saw old branches into curved rails, fastening joints with twine and rusty nails. The gate took shape slowly, not perfect, not symmetrical, but beautiful in its own wild way. They painted it crimson, a match for the Red Castle, and adorned it with symbols from their drawings. A fox, a lantern, a tower, a handprint, and one feather. Afterward, they installed it at the edge of the sunflower patch that bordered the north fence. "It doesn't lead anywhere," Emerson said. "Not yet," Lily replied. Later that day, Emerson drove into town. He needed to speak with his lawyer, Marla Singh, about pushing forward with the final stage of the adoption process. She had been cautious, knowing how tangled the state system had become, but something in her tone on the phone hinted at good news. At the office, Marla waved him in her smile, tight but genuine. "I have something," she said, sliding a file across the desk. Emerson flipped it open. A single notarized letter lay inside. The girl's mother, Marla, explained. "We never found a death certificate, but we did find this. She left it with a counselor at a temporary shelter over 3 years ago. He kept it thinking someone might come asking." Emerson read the letter. The handwriting was jagged but firm. "To whoever finds them. Their names are Lily, Emma, and Sophie. They are my heart. If I do not return, it is not because I did not try. Protect them. And if you can find a man named Emerson Blake, he used to write stories about lost girls. Tell him they are real. And they are his now." It was signed Marisol R. Emerson could not speak. The silence between him and Marla thickened. "She knew you?" Marla asked softly. "I do not remember," he said. "But maybe I was never meant to." He left the office with the letter pressed to his chest. That evening he did not tell the girls about it. Not yet. But he tucked it beneath their drawing of the red castle slid between the pages of the journal they had begun together. They would find it one day, when they were ready. That night, as they sat outside watching stars bloom in the velvet sky, Sophie curled up next to him and asked, "Will we still be here next year?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And the year after, yes. And forever." He paused, then looked into her eyes. "As long as forever means home, then yes." Lily added, "We want to go to school. Not like before. A real one. With books and field trips." Emma chimed in, "And we want to help fix the library in town. The one nobody uses anymore." Emerson smiled. "Then that is what we will do." The next morning they drove into town together. At the school, the principal was wary. 3 girls with no prior records, no formal parents, and mysterious gaps in their past. It was not an easy ask. But after Emerson shared some of their story, and after Lily handed over a notebook filled with essays she had written in secret, the principal agreed to a trial enrollment. "Just a few classes," she warned, "and I want regular reports." "We will be better than regular," Lily said. "We will be unforgettable." The girls burst into the building like sunlight, unsure but bold. Emerson waited in the truck, heart pounding. By the time they came back out hours later, their faces were pink with laughter and their backpacks full of papers. "Can we come again tomorrow?" Emma asked. "Yes," he said. They stopped by the public library next. The building smelled of mold and long-forgotten books. The windows were clouded, the floorboards dusty. Emma walked down the rows of sagging shelves and whispered, "This place is asleep." "We should wake it," Sophie added. "I will speak to the mayor," Emerson promised. "We will start a reading circle." "And a drawing table," Lily said. "And a quiet corner," Sophie whispered. As they drove back to the farm, Emerson looked at them through the rearview mirror. He no longer saw shadows, no longer saw wounds first. He saw them as they truly were: builders, artists, healers, not his rescue mission, his family. Weeks passed, the barn filled with new drawings, the garden gate became a destination. They strung ribbons across it and declared every Saturday a safe day, where no sadness was allowed and no past could cross the threshold. People in town started noticing. Neighbors dropped off donations: paint, books, carpentry tools. A retired librarian offered to help with the project. Even Deputy Paul showed up one weekend with a bucket of nails and a grin on his face. Then one morning, as the first frost dusted the cornfields in silver, Emerson found something on his porch. A note, written in blocky letters. "You were right. They are better off with you. But some people do not forget." It was unsigned. No return address, no clue. He folded it up and placed it in the same journal where Marisol's letter lived. He said nothing to the girls. He would protect them, again and again if he had to. One late night, as wind battered the roof and the girls slept inside the red castle with lanterns glowing soft, Emerson sat by the garden gate. He ran his fingers along the symbols carved into the wood. He thought of the way Lily led even in silence, of the way Emma saw color in everything, even ruin, of the way Sophie had begun humming again songs without lyrics but full of memory. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Marisol, wherever you are." Behind him, the barn door creaked open. Lily stood there wrapped in a quilt. She walked to him and sat beside him. "Do you miss her?" she asked. "Every day," he replied. "I do too," she said, and leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat that way until morning. When the sun rose, it spilled gold across the field, catching the edges of the garden gate like it was something sacred. And in that moment, Emerson realized something. He had not just saved 3 girls. They had returned him to the world. Sometimes the gates we build are not meant to keep the world out, but to invite love in. This was a story about lost things being found, about silent hearts learning to speak again, and about how family is not always born, it is chosen day by day. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these moments can travel. And if you believe in second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that grows in unexpected soil, don't forget to subscribe and click on the stories waiting on your screen. Thanks for being here. See you in the next story.